Hey guys, this is James and Tim with Tabletop Terrors, and today we want to talk about plot hooks and sort of this idea where a lot of times if you work with your players, eventually if you run campaign or a few sessions, it begins writing itself. And I say it that way, but really it's sort of you and the players writing it together, but it feels very natural.
And to me, this is also for players who might not have a specific vision in mind for their character, which is okay, especially to start with. This is going to be a good video to help you think of, well, what does my character want?
Exactly.
Which I think would be really cool. So,
yeah.
Awesome.
The thing specifically in that sense that I want to talk about today is what I call player plot hooks or character plot hooks, and that's sort of a vague name I realize now, but specifically your player characters, it's easy for your players to be invested. Some people always ask, there's a bit of a social contract, in my opinion, that comes with playing a role-playing game, where if you're there, it's sort of assumed that you're going to try to give a little bit. You're not going to argue, no, my character wouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but that's the adventure, so we got to find a way to get you in there. Now,
right.
The idea being that, well, yeah, find a way to get them in there. What does their character want? What do they want to do? And by, like you said, sort of exploring what your players want and, as a player exploring what your character wants,
yeah.
I think you can have some really cool arcs if you try and explore personal plot hooks.
Right, and I think, a differentiator, kind of because what you were saying is it's player plot hooks or personal plot hook. Personal plot hook's a good one. Basically, this is just your character's goals.
Yeah.
What are your character's goals, and then make a plot hook out of them. However you want to phrase that.
Yeah, allow them to play out. You don't even really have to call them plot hooks, but as a GM, if you weave them in, if you do so in such a way that, well, and it's really easy with the players, if you try and weave those in, it can make it seem like you wrote a really cool and complicated plot, but really the players are helping you by just trying to achieve their goals.
Exactly. So where does this topic even come from? Well, I think a lot of game masters are thinking, okay, well, how do I keep the campaign fresh? What do I do next? Where do we go? How do we, proceed from here? And I think that it's pretty frequent that there's this main plot that everyone's kind of thinking like, oh, okay, well, there's a MacGuffin or there's a war or what have you. And it's totally separate from what the characters are desiring as characters. And I think when you mash the two together, that's when it hits the territory you're talking about where the campaign starts writing itself.
Exactly.
So,
because it's not, what do you guys want to do? The world is your oyster. It's what do you guys want to do? And the players have an answer. I'm like,
right.
We met this character, this NPC that I learned killed my parents. So I want to see what he's doing. Like as a character, a lot of stuff is happening in the world, and okay, that interests me somewhat. But revenge. I'm like, no, that's what I'm driven by.
Exactly. And so here's a really good piece of writing advice that applies to players. I heard this writing advice, and it's characters should always want something, even if it's as simple as a glass of water.
That's the thing. I wouldn't even say that they should always. Characters do always want something.
That's even better.
Like there are. I heard of somebody that was like, oh, hey, my one of my characters just wants to be a farmer. He has no reason to do anything. And I'm like, well, every great story starts with the conflict there.
So right there, if I'm a game master, as simple as that sounds, all right, you've been drafted.
There you go. What do? You can stay on your farm, but you're going to get arrested.
So, what do? And that's where the game comes in. I'm not going to answer that question. What does the farmer do? Well, when he's faced with the soldiers that come to collect him for the draft, that's the session.
Exactly.
Instead of, well, I don't have any goals. I don't have any. It's like, no, your goal is to stay home.
Yeah, you always want something, even if you don't actively look for something. It's like, no, you want to keep doing the same thing.
You have active Frodoism. You want to stay in your hobbit hole.
You got the that Bagginsies on your.
Yep.
You can see on the left side of the face,
right there. If you look at the X-ray. So This brings up another good point. Why is it that villains never have this problem? They always seem to want something, right? And this is exactly why this is so important. Because villains, the reason why they're so interesting is because they go after what they want, and what they want is usually large scale and affects many others.
Yeah.
Right? So, stop letting your heroes just be reactive.
Exactly.
That's the main thing. Villains are active. Most heroes are reactive. Love him or hate him, Superman, I think the reason why it's so difficult to nail a good, consistent string of stories for him, Superman is the number one example of a reactive character.
Exactly.
He is resting, he sits, and he waits for things to happen to him. Superman doesn't have any goals. He doesn't have any long-term things he's trying to achieve in the long run. I know there are some arcs that have incorporated those things. Don't let your heroes have that Supermanitis.
Where they're in the tavern until somebody comes in and asks them to do something.
What do they want without external influence? That is how you come up with a personal plotline. And you tell your game master, and your game master says, oh, okay. Like we said, as simple as you were saying, this farmer wants to stay home. While that sounds like the opposite of the advice, it's the advice.
Now, the thing I want to bring up is specifically in the case of the farmer. We told you, all right, your campaign at this point will start writing itself. Basically, the players have to give you a little bit, but that's all they need to give you. A good example is when in the Ironheart of Innis game that I ran for you and a few other people, one of the characters played by Mike the Piper, his character was wanted as part of his backstory.
Right.
He didn't really tell me that. It came out in the game. And so I threw a wanted poster in there. You guys found a wanted poster clearly of him on it with a bounty.
Right.
And I didn't know what you'd do, what he would do, anything. But I'm like, hey, man, literally all I did was, write this story for me, guys. What would your character do?
Exactly. And that goes back to, we have another video. It's called Making Interesting Villains, or Make Your Villains More Interesting, or something like that. I'm telling you, this is the trick. This is the hack to any tabletop RPG plot writing. Find the thing your characters want, and then put something in between them and their goal.
Yeah.
Period. In this case...
that's every adventure. Exactly.
That's it. And in this case, Mike the Piper, this fugitive, Neath Fallenoak, wanted many things. In this particular case with the wanted poster, he didn't want to be imprisoned.
Exactly.
So...
And his character, as far as his backstory is, he was wrongly wanted. It was a corrupt guy. He was framed for murder, and so that makes it even more interesting. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the person committed the murder and they're wanted.
Nope. Drop that wanted poster in there, and in that case, that's the thing between him and his freedom. The wanted poster, as small as that sounds. So
because I knew as much as the players did about why he was wanted, who he was wanted by. I heard all the same stuff they did. And that made it interesting because, like I said, I basically told them, hey, write this for me.
And if you want to put it on turbo, make the thing between the character and their goal a person or people, because then there's actual conflict and it can go back and forth and there can be discussion and there can be... Yeah. So rather than, and I'm just saying, what if? Rather than it being a wanted poster, what if it was a person showing around a wanted poster?
Exactly.
Immediately it torques up the tension.
Because that's actually, now, that is a really cool idea, and while it wouldn't have worked in the miniseries that I was doing because I had a limited amount of sessions, the reason that's really cool is because they can handle it. The players can handle it. They can not handle it. They can hide. Obviously, if a guy is saying, hey, if you see this person, I'll give you, if you turn them in, I'll give you money. Suddenly the town might be against them. But it creates a really interesting interpersonal thing with the players because, Like I said, he says that he didn't commit the murder, but you don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So here's how it could have worked in your game. Any of the times where Neath wasn't necessarily right out in the open, have one of the characters notice his face on a wanted poster someone else is showing around.
Exactly.
Then that also lets the person who sees, well, that's Neath, that's the guy that's with us. It gives them a character choice. Do I tell everybody else?
Exactly.
Do I address this with Neith alone?
And even better, that can be the main thing. But it's even better and will make your world feel even more alive if there's something else that is also pressing. You know, like, hey, we have to do this. You know, we're in the army. We're on the way to this place. And, you know, we're passing through multiple towns. And now we realize that we have potentially a murderer in our midst. What happens if the army finds out? What happens?
Exactly.
All of these different things that are questions that you don't have to come up with as a GM or even as a player. They just come up naturally because of that one little bit of backstory.
Exactly. No, that's a great way to put it. So how do you put this into practice? I think you take these two moving pieces. One, as a player, all you players out there, don't hate the player. What you I'm not apologizing for that. I stand by it. What you have to do is decide what your character wants. Then your game master decides what obstacle to put in between you and what you want. Now, you're thinking, well, I'm just figuring out my character. I don't know. Or, well, the revenge thing you're talking about before. I want to get the guy that killed my brother. Okay, well, he's on another continent. Yeah. It's okay to start small. As simple as it sounds, my weapon broke and I want to get it fixed.
Yeah.
That's it. You just need to want something that the game master can put something in the middle of.
Well, and even to speak to that, the idea being, okay, you can want something bigger, but so, okay, say I'm like, all right, I want to, you know, exact my revenge. And the game master says, well, okay, where do you go? Well, where is he? Well, you have no idea where he is.
Right.
Okay, so that's the thing in my way, but it also is a new goal. So I'm like, okay, well, I want to find out where he is.
Right.
Okay, so what would you do? You know, how would you do that? And you can literally say anything. I could say I would go back to his old stomping grounds. I would, you know, go ask around in a bar, anything. And something, and I say this every video, so it's now at this point it's obligatory. I could talk for a whole video about this, but the idea is that you are writing a story. And like a good story, you kind of, not fudge it, but you put something in the way. I mean, I think some people might be bothered by that. Like, oh, well, that's not realistic. Like, yeah, but we're making a story. Like, That's sort of the point. Now, it could very well be ham-fisted, and, you know, you have to be careful, not just say, oh, you can't do that because there's a golem. You know, I'm like, no, you're just literally putting a physical object in my way. But there's always something in the way of what you want. Otherwise, you'd have it.
Yeah, no kidding.
So it's like, if you just let it happen naturally, you can work together with the GM or opposite, you know, the GM with the players to just make the adventure about getting what they want, and it'll write itself.
Exactly. So let's talk about world plot. If that's character goal plot, every once in a while throw in some world plot. And that's how you keep the overarching story going. I've heard the phrase, life is what happens in between plans.
Yeah.
That's when the world plot comes in. So you have this, you know, this character who's looking for the person that murdered their brother. They take a few steps. They get closer. They get a little closer. And then an invading force.
An invading force, so the airship they had to take across the sea to go to this place, to take more steps to find the person, you know, shot down.
Or it's commandeered. It's like, yeah, you're coming with us now.
It's taken over on the trip, and they divert it and they go somewhere else.
And it's like, you know, now, that to me is a good mix to where it's like you're constantly putting friction and putting obstacles between a character and their goals. Because then when you do achieve that goal, to me, there's a huge payoff because it's been a long time coming.
And exactly, it's very natural. You know, it's what you want. Because if you don't want to solve the world plot, whatever it is, you know, if you have no concern about the big bad, you know, that's coming, well, it's probably going to affect you.
Right.
But you don't have to do anything about it. But eventually you're going to have to do something about it.
Because it's affecting and getting in the way of your goals. And that's actually another good way to show, I think, so like the big bad and why it matters. Keeping things in perspective. It's not just, the villain's plotting alone in his lair, and the heroes wait in the tavern to stop him. It's like,
exactly.
No.
And it's
this
not
is
like,
affecting things that are going to affect you indirectly and the world indirectly as well.
It's not like, okay, you're good and he's bad, so go kill him. It's like, hey, you stopped into this town and everybody's sick. Well, why? Well, we're not sure, but there's something coming from the sewers. Okay, well, you go investigate. Well, you investigate because you need to talk to somebody in this town and they're sick. You know what I mean? I'm like... It begins to follow. And
right there. So, one of the last living members of the squad of the gang, or what have you, who was part of the mission where your brother was double-crossed and killed, is so sick and laid up in bed in a village called Sandwall. You need to find the cure, if nothing else, just to save him so that you can torture him and get the information that you need.
Exactly. And I think that makes it interesting because, okay, so maybe they get to a point in the adventure then where they have to decide. Okay, I mean, you could save the whole town, but it might lessen your chances of saving this one person.
Exactly.
I'm like, moral dilemma now. I'm like, well, how important is it to your character that, you know, they exact revenge? Are you willing to take that chance? And then there's inner party. And again, I don't feel like that sort of storytelling, that style, takes a lot of prep. Because you just put something out there. You don't make that mistake of saying, well, when my players do this, this happens.
Exactly.
And I'm like, no, just say, let's see what happens when I do this.
Right. Let them react, respond, and that's what we mean by writing itself. That's literally, when we say the campaign's quote-unquote writing itself, what we're saying is the session unfolds in real time where the characters and the players make choices that otherwise would have never even existed. Exactly,
because you can never bank on what the players are going to do, and they come up with clever stuff a lot of the time.
Listen, like I said, and I'll say this is like I'm coining the phrase, if rule 0 is that the DM is always right, rule -1 is that your players will never do what you expect.
Exactly.
Period. So I guess we'll close with this. Here are some gotchas. Here are some things to avoid. Here are some bad things that can happen. If all 4, 5, 6 people, however many people are in your party, are all going different directions to fulfill their personal goals, well, now you're playing 6 solo campaigns.
Yeah.
So that's why it's good to have smaller wants in addition to your overarching wants. Like, in fact, I'm just coming up with this off the cuff, but it's probably, if you had to scale it out and kind of like jot down some notes, have like a big overarching one, a medium, and then like a small. Yeah. Like, I want to get my weapon fixed. You know, it's a broken weapon. It means a lot to me for X reason. I want to get it fixed, but there's not a blacksmith who can fix this kind of steel.
Yeah.
So you're always looking around trying to get that weapon fixed. Then like a medium one is maybe you owe a debt or something.
And that's the important thing, is it...
And then the large one would be the revenge thing.
It doesn't have to be what your characters or what your players are doing every moment. Because again, you know, like you said...
Then you become Michael from Lost.
Life is what
my
happens.
Son! And you're like, oh, that one note is just punching me in my last nerve.
Life is what happens between plans. The idea is that other things are going to happen, but, you know, you got to pay the bills. There are other things you have to do. You might, like you said, you might have a debt to somebody that means you can't just run off gallivanting around and trying to find... So that's the important thing is, again, I mentioned sort of that social contract where to some degree the players are going to try and stay together because otherwise, like you said, you're not playing together.
Nah.
You know, like that's the part of the movie that we hand wave because it's like, well, no, all of these things happen to the main character because he's the main character. As unlikely as that seems, but otherwise there's no movie.
Exactly.
So that, to me, is an important thing to realize, but if you keep that in mind, it won't be a big deal to achieve this. It won't be a big deal. You know, if you can get over that, you'll never feel like, oh, well, that seems unfair, or that seems meta, to say, well, no, there's just something between you and everything you want. I'm like, well, no, really. Like, if I want to get up and get a drink right now, there's something between me. Like, I'm filming a video. I can't.
Right.
I'm like, no, there's always something, but it doesn't matter. So don't focus on the obstacle. Just figure out what they want and just follow that naturally.
Right.
You know, don't force it. You know?
Right. And so the thing to remember is, too, this all comes down to the people you're playing with and play styles, as always. But in an ideal situation, I like to think that my favorite kind of game is where I'm playing with, in characters who care enough about each other that they would say, well, you know what, I know that this is probably the best opportunity for you to find the person that killed your brother, so I'm going to lay down my personal goal.
Exactly.
Mine, and I'm going to help you pursue yours. And it becomes reciprocal like that, because that also builds these crazy character bonds.
Yeah.
That you just, I love. I just love them. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully it makes sense. And remember, I should probably have some kind of I don't know, I just wanted to say...
Well, okay. Remember that we're talking a very grand scale here. So you can achieve this in a say a one shot or a few sessions, and the way you do that is you ask the characters what they want, the players what their characters want, but you don't make the story about that. You make the story about whatever the story is about. You make it the plot hook, but by knowing what they want, you can spice it up and give them more dilemmas and otherwise sort of pepper in a little more story, almost as though you know all of their backstories, but you don't.
Right.
You just throw in something that might apply to them, and they react to it, and it just suddenly it's a story written by 5 people rather than 1.
There it is. And so, players, your homework is come up with something your character wants. Like I said, if it's as simple as a glass of water, that's what they want. And then game masters come up with something that's a realistic, interesting obstacle that ties into maybe your plot to put in the way. And if it's something as simple as we're out of water.
Yeah. Everybody's sick. You can't drink the water.
Sorry. It's it. So you can get some, but you have to walk 3 miles. And it's like,
exactly.
I'm thirsty now. Already, there you go. There's conflict. So, So, like this video. Share it. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe below. I never know where to point.
Just down.
There's a button. You know what I've always wanted to do? I've always wanted to do this and have something appear in my hand. Bing. It's like, hold on, it's not working.
You're careful, you're going to drop it.
I know. But if you want more videos like this, go to tabletopterrors.com. And I'm still getting over a cold, so it's like I'm like running on a 3-second delay. This whole video, I'm like,
remember, that's it. That's just never forget.
Never forget. Yeah, so this one's going to end with a fizzle, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so until next time, may your dice not fizzle when you roll them high.
And
we're still workshopping that one.
We're still workshopping that one. And may I not have a flop sweat from flu symptoms.
TabletopTerrors.com. Subscribe to our channel.